There we go. Okay, that looks like it's working, which is the most I could hope for. So hello, everyone. Welcome to Pride to the Future. It's been a month. It's been a year. It's been a couple of years. So hopefully we're going to have some fun today and talk about both how we've celebrated in these kind of difficult times, but also what we're looking forward to in the future. How do we want to see Pride evolve, and what can we do to send it in that direction? I'm thrilled to be joined by authors from all over the country. And I'd like to start with maybe a quick lightning round, if you will. I know Ben's in a place where there is actual lightning happening. So just, let me know, how did you celebrate Pride this year? Elliot, why don't you start us off?
Okay, sure. One of the things I did with Pride this year was work to help facilitate an LGBTQ organization at the University of Mississippi, where I teach. This has been something that we really started before the pandemic, and sort of the spring semester of 2 years ago. And given the fact that we all were working from home this past year, some colleagues of mine worked on kind of developing this organization so that our students, our LGBTQ students, would have a place to go, a central place to go, and not only to meet other LGBTQ students like themselves, but also to meet faculty and staff throughout the university who they can go to, they can talk to, that can serve as mentors and can serve as hopefully role models for them, so that they feel included and they feel like a part of the campus community. And this is something that really grew out of student recommendations. This was not something that really was on the upper level of the university concerns at the time, but this kind of came from the students, from a grassroots level up. And so we've been working on that. We were hoping to launch it this past fall, but then the pandemic started. So we're really excited to start this once school starts, and to be not only a place where students can go, but we want to be a visible part of campus. We want to be just as visible and just as active and engaged with the campus community and the Oxford community at large, just like fraternities and sororities are. So, and other clubs and organizations. So we're real excited about that coming up in August. So that's what I did to celebrate Pride, kind of looking ahead to the future post-Pride.
Great.
Okay, I'll go next. So I kicked off Pride Month by having a huge in-person poetry event that was a huge success. It was both to celebrate my chapbook coming out, but also I needed that sense of community, and not necessarily even just queer community, but poetry community, right? Like the sense of like artists and creators and creatives coming together. And we were fortunate enough that just as Ohio was easing up restrictions, we had this massive event. We had like 30 more people than we thought were going to be there show up. So we were like near 80 people when we thought we were going to have like 50. And it was so spectacular. People were crying and there was so much hugging, and it just really was amazing. And then let's see, what else? I guest hosted the Pride edition of the Wild and Precious Life series that's run by Dustin Brookshire. That was amazing. We had all queer poets from all different types of poetry, super inclusive, diverse group. It was so amazing. And then I have to admit, because we've been cooped up in the house for so long, I went totally old school. And I got my fan out and I went to a pool party, and I went and stood in line for 45 minutes to get a weak ass vodka soda at a gay bar. So that was how I celebrated Pride. I love a prop.
Sounds like a return to some sort of normalcy. Good.
Well, I have, excuse me, sadly, I wasn't able to do anything personally because my husband has a lot of mobility issues, so I wasn't able to go. But I will say for Huntington, West Virginia, that we have been on the forefront in terms of cities in the state in being inclusive. We've got a mandate from the mayor that says open to all, and cities, restaurants and bars and all sorts of things all over Huntington have that sticker on their front door This year, because the pandemic had eased and West Virginia is in pretty good shape, we had a huge pride parade. And the best I could do, because I was kind of stuck here, was to promote it on social media and make sure that everybody knew that I was a supporter and have been for a long time.
Great. Thank you for your allyship. And Jeff, how about you?
Well, I think mostly what I've been doing is actually giving some talks about my book that I'm going to say more about here in just a few minutes. I got a number of invitations to speak, and this is a book about a lesbian couple who was resisting the Nazis during World War II, and it's a story that most people haven't heard before. And so had a number of opportunities to speak and to tell that story. And when I've told the story, all of this being over Zoom, people have been really inspired and have been really sort of, surprised by the story, but really found it inspirational. And I have had people email me directly and say, this is a really amazing story, and write to me in the chat on Zoom and various things, tweet at me. And so I really felt like that there was, of course, it was a great opportunity for me to talk about the book, but it seems like it was also an opportunity to help to create and facilitate some community around history and thinking about how every story matters, every story needs to be told. And so that's been something I've been thinking a lot about this month.
Great. Congratulations on the publication. It's been a little bit weird here in California. Our opening date was, I think, about a week and a half ago. And on the date we reopened, I was headed up into the mountains for a week-long kind of retreat into nature. So now that I'm back and there's a day left in Pride, I mean, I'm happy to be here. I am doing a little bit of work behind the scenes to help a writing workshop get started that is focused on helping HIV positive and newly diagnosed clients. I should say HIV elders and newly diagnosed clients of APLA Health tell their stories. And so that'll be a workshop that runs facilitated by the City of West Hollywood Poet Laureate Brian Sonia Wallace. It'll run over a series of weeks, and hopefully at the end, there will be some great new writers that we can introduce to all of you. So that's something I'm very excited about. And I guess it's a good segue in that Pride is continuing into the future. And so July comes and we'll still all be here kind of doing our thing and sharing our writing going forward. So we will get to the question of what Pride holds for the future. If people have thoughts or questions for us, they can put them in the chat. You can put them in the Q&A. And if you're on YouTube watching us, you can put it in the chat there and I'll keep an eye on it. But before we get to that, we're going to hear from each of our writers today a little bit more about their work. Hopefully they'll share some of their words with us and riff on the topic of what we want to see in Pride in the future. So if Elliot could start us off, I'll put him on spotlight and we'll hear from him.
Okay. Oh. Have I been unmuted?
We can hear you and see you. It might not look like it to you, but you're front and center and audible.
Oh my goodness, front and center. Well, that's I've always felt like I have a voice for radio and a face for radio, so this will be good evidence of that I've been spotlighted here. But thanks, Cody, very much. And I'm going to be sharing some excerpts of my thriller novel called A Knife's Edge. This book is a series of stories that started with a previous book called Fragile Brilliance. I'm working on the third book in the series right now, but it is centered on a gay police officer in Charleston, West Virginia named Ronan McCullough. And this passage I chose to read is midway towards past the halfway point, sort of past the climax of the book, when one of Ronan's colleagues finds out that he is gay. And one of the threads and the themes of the novel is that Ronan is fiercely protective of his sexuality and does not want anyone within the department to know, because it could ruin him. It could jeopardize his standing in the department, his career, He's involved with and in a relationship with an emergency room nurse named Ty. And so you'll hear his name referenced in this passage. But this is Sean and Ronan talking about Ronan's secret that he's tried to keep. Sean has figured it out. And the reaction that Sean gives Ronan, despite his fear, is something that when I think about pride going to the future and in the future, and I can talk more about it later, I hope we all have the same attitudes if we're ever in this situation when we're having a conversation with someone who is afraid or worried or nervous about who they really are, that we react the way that Sean does. So I'll just read a few passages from this. They're on a stakeout, and so they're sort of in a truck looking out and kind of keeping an eye on this guard that they're watching who's up to no good. Ronan dropped the binoculars, and then they fell into the well of the truck below his feet. Ronan reached down and fumbled with the phone as it continued to blink and whirl. Sean watched Ronan with interest until Ronan was finally able to swipe the red X below the name, dismissing the call. Ronan felt his chest burn. If Sean inquired about why Ty would call, Ronan would have to come up with a logical response. Silence filled the space between them. Ronan felt worse as the seconds ticked by. After a few moments, Sean spoke. I know Ty means a great deal to you. The words hit Ronan with such force, he didn't know whether to lunge at Sean or to bolt from the truck. In September, I was the investigating detective at the house on Autumn Road when that man broke in and knocked Ty unconscious and chained up your sister. Ty was consumed with worry when we could not tell him where you were. The memory of that night made bile from Ronan's stomach catch in his throat. 2 high-level enforcers in the Desomorphine crime syndicate had learned where Ronan lived. Ty and his sister Melissa had been home. Ty was knocked unconscious and Melissa had been chained to a chair like a wild animal. Ronan had managed to snap the neck of one of the men, but when Ronan struggled to free Melissa, a needle full of succinylcholine had been jabbed into his neck. Sean paused. When the captain wanted to review Ty's interview with us in the office, I watched you carefully. Ronan shivered. But then you called Ty a coconut nigger. Sean looked away for a second. I needed to test my theory. I could tell he meant more to you than just an ordinary witness, and your reaction to my comment proved it. A cold shiver ran up Ronan's back at the memory. Sean set his jaw. I think you feel the same way about Ty. Ronan looked away. I don't want to talk about this. It's my business and none of yours. Sean persisted. Being in a committed relationship with a cop is not easy. Ronan slapped his hand on the steering wheel. He leaned over to Sean, setting a hard look on him. Ronan could feel the veins protruding out from his neck and his heart pumping with fury. I said, I don't want to talk about it. Pretend the cell phone never rang. Sean slid back until he was crumpled against the door of the truck, his eyes wide. Fine, I'll drop it. Ronan held the stare for a moment to make sure Sean got the message. Ronan slowly moved back across the cab of the truck to settle in his seat. A few minutes passed. Both Sean and Ronan stared out the window. A cold wind swirled through the alley and began to cloud over the glass windshield inside the truck. Ronan reached into the floorboard of the seat behind him and brought up a rag. Ronan? I need to wipe off the glass, he answered. If I start the engine to run the defroster, that guard will know he's being watched. That's not what I mean, Sean said softly. Ronan took 2 wide swipes with the cloth and managed to wipe away a large portion of the frost. Ronan, put that damn rag down and look at me. Frustrated, Ronan threw the rag at the glass. It landed in a harmless clump on the dashboard. Ronan slowly turned until he eyed Sean. I don't need to know what's going on with you and Ty Andino. And if you don't want to tell me about the relationship you two have, that's fine. That way, if anyone inside the department ever asks me, I don't have to lie. Sean appeared sincere and his words sounded genuine. He seemed to weigh the direction of the conversation before continuing. But please don't take me for an idiot. Sean arched an eyebrow and Ronan nodded curtly. Besides, Sean continued, being gay is just a part of who you are. It doesn't define who you are. He turned his attention back to the windshield and focused on the stoic guard standing by the door. I think you're still a damn good cop. A pain in the ass, no doubt, but a good cop. Love is love. Who you choose to be with doesn't matter, and it's not anyone else's business. Sean perched an arm on the door and rested his chin on a closed fist. Ronan felt overwhelmed and relieved. He had worked for so long at keeping his secret from the rank and file of the department. Ronan realized that this also was the first time he and Sean had spoken on a matter that did not involve a police investigation. Thanks, Ronan said haltingly. I appreciate your understanding. I meant it, every word. Ronan nodded. I know. So I hope that, as we go through life and as we meet people in our lives, that we can extend that same kind of kindness and grace to people that we know who may be struggling with all kinds of different issues regarding being an LGBTQ individual, and that we can respond the way Sean responded in that situation, no matter what the circumstances are or what our relationship is with that person.
Thank you, Elliot. And yeah, I think I'm thinking a lot about sort of different workplaces and professions and how we insist that LGBTQ plus is normal and not an accommodation. And so thank you for that excerpt. We're going to hear next, and we'll hear more from you in a minute. We're going to hear next from Jeffrey Jackson. And I apologize, I skipped over Elliot's bio. So I'm going to read that now, and then I'll read Jeff's. So that was my bad. So Elliot, who we just heard from, is the author of the short story collection Snapshots, which won the 2020 Pencraft Literary Award and the 2021 Feathered Quill Book Award for short story anthology. His thriller novel, A Knife's Edge, which we heard from and which we enjoyed, was an Amazon #1 bestseller and is currently being optioned as a television series by Open Gate Pictures. Elliot has received the West Virginia Literary Merit Award for his works and has also been a finalist for the Southern Book Prize in thriller writing in 2017 for his novel Fragile Brilliance. His thriller novel Code for Murder is currently optioned for film developed by Philways Pictures. He hosts the podcast program Now Appalachia, which profiles authors, editors, and publishers in the Appalachian region. Elliot, if you could drop a link to that podcast, I think people are going to want to sign up for that. A graduate of the Bluegrass Writers Studio at Eastern Kentucky University with his MFA in creative writing, and a graduate of Murray State University with his doctorate in English, Elliot teaches writing at the University of Mississippi. So yeah, drop your links down there in the chat and tell people how they can hear more from you. Okay, there we go. Moving along, we're going to hear next from Jeffrey Jackson, who is a professor of history at Rhodes College. Let me put Jeffrey on spotlight for everyone. There you go. His most recent book, Paper Bullets, Two Artists Who Risked Their Lives to Defy the Nazis, was longlisted for the 2021 Andrew Carnegie Medal for Excellence in Nonfiction. Tells the story of an audacious anti-Nazi resistance campaign undertaken by a French lesbian couple, Lucy Schwab and Suzanne Malherbe, better known today by their artistic names, Claude Calhoun and Marcel Moore. He is also the author of Paris Underwater, How the City of Lights Survived the Great Flood of 1910, and Making Jazz French, Music and Modern Life in Interwar Paris, both of which have been received with high acclaim. Bienvenue, Jeffrey Jackson. You can find more about him at his website, which is jeffreyhjackson.com, and he'll put the link in the chat as well.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for that intro, and it's so great to be here. And I want to read I'll read a couple of excerpts from Paper Bullets, which is the book that we were just referencing. As you just heard, it's the story of a lesbian couple fighting against the Nazis on the island of Jersey, which is one of the Channel Islands in the English Channel, the only British territory that the German army conquered during World War II. This is not a story that's very familiar. The story of the islands is not familiar to a lot of American audiences, but this particular story is also not very well known, even though the two women that I write about have become somewhat well known by their artistic names, Claude Calhoun and Marcel Moore. And some of you may be familiar with their photography, with some of their work. Amazing stuff. You can find some of it on my website. I'll put the link in the chat in just a couple of minutes. So this is a nonfiction book. This is a work of historical research. Everything in here is based in deep archival research and footnoted, but I write it in a narrative style. So it reads hopefully like a novel or like a good story, even though it all is completely true. And in the book, I talk about many different aspects of their work and of their lives, and especially of their resistance work. And basically what they did was they wrote notes to the Nazis. They tried to undermine Nazi morale by writing these notes. And you can find out more about this on my website and even see some examples of some of the notes that they wrote. These were powerful notes written to the Germans in German to try to, get them to think about why were they doing this? Why were they occupying this island? But one of the things that I wanted to emphasize for this reading was really the relationship, the love story between Lucy and Suzanne. Those were their birth names that they went by, Lucy Schwab and Suzanne Malherbe. And so I wanted to read a couple of passages that relate to the love story, because I think that they couldn't have done this resistance work if they hadn't had this powerful relationship, if they weren't a couple. They both brought different qualities to the relationship and to the work, but they were very different people. But they really needed each other in order to make this work. So the first passage that I want to read is a passage from one of the interrogations. So this is Lucy that's being interrogated by a German officer after they've been caught for passing these notes or leaving these notes around the island. And so this is Lucy under interrogation, and she is admitting to what they've done, but with a twist. And I'll give some additional context in just a second. I alone was the cause of all this, she suddenly confessed. The typewriter belongs to me, and Suzanne doesn't know how to use it. The photo montages were mine. I wrote all the texts. I organized everything. Suzanne only translated the text into German and accompanied me when I distributed the papers. The statement was not true. Suzanne had been just as involved and just as complicit as Lucy in creating and distributing the texts and other items. Lucy herself recalled as much in her post-war reminiscences. But now she was trying to take the fall. You must understand this, she pleaded, trying to convince him that she was the sole actor. My family suffered in the War of 1870 and that of 1914-1918. This, she claimed, was her motive, and hers alone, for revenge against the Germans. Then Lucy made a stunning admission, which put her in grave danger. Remembering the moment years later, she described it with characteristic understatement as imprudent, but saying it would maybe help her prove that she and not Suzanne had good reason to undertake all the things they had done. Finally, I am, on my father's side, of Jewish origin. Lucy did not record Loza's reaction, but surely he was at the very least curious as to why she had not registered as Jewish, which was required under the Nazi regulations. This confession meant that Lucy was putting her own life on the line for Suzanne. Loza did not buy Lucy's performance. He pulled out a carbon copy, one of the hundreds they had produced, of a manuscript of a song which Suzanne had written in Old German script. He asked Lucy to tell him what any of it meant or to reproduce the letters, but she just shrugged her shoulders. The truth, it was more often me who accompanied Suzanne, she who took the initiative, that required the most sang-froid, was something Lucy revealed in her later writings, but never to Loza, her interrogator. So the context for that passage is that, that, as I say, this is under interrogation, but what's happening is that Lucy is trying to get Suzanne off. She's trying to convince this German soldier that Suzanne, her partner, who she had been in love with, had been in a relationship with for decades by this point, had nothing to do with it. So she was really trying to somehow get the Germans to ignore Suzanne or to think that she didn't really have anything to do with it. This was a real powerful act of love on Lucy's part. She was willing to sacrifice herself to admit that she had Jewish family, that her father's family was Jewish, and therefore under Nazi regulations that she would be considered a Jew. And by putting herself in danger, putting her own life on the line, she was hoping to save the life of her partner, of the woman that she loved, Suzanne. But of course, the Nazis weren't buying that. They knew that both of them were in fact responsible for this note writing campaign, this resistance campaign, to try to get inside the minds of German soldiers on the island. I'll read one other excerpt that also kind of emphasizes the relationship, the love story between these two women. And this is a scene from when they're in prison and they're trying to pass notes to one another to help keep up each other's spirits. Lucy reached up to the opening of the ventilation shaft and pulled down on a thin string threaded through the ductwork. After carefully scribbling a note on a thin piece of toilet paper, she attached it to the thread and pulled, feeding her letter several feet through the vent. Moments later, the note appeared in the ventilation shaft in Suzanne's cell. Suzanne delicately removed it from the filament. Others had taught them to use this and similar techniques, which they called their postal system. Several times each day, Lucy and Suzanne sent messages to each other, occasionally using pages torn from a book or a sanitary napkin or some toilet paper that they had stolen from the guards. Excuse me. Pencils smuggled into the prison were usually hidden inside a morsel of food brought by a friend from the outside and then passed between the inmates. Suzanne also encouraged Lucy to tap on the pipe above her bed after lights out to let her know all was well. Writing and sketching helped them pass the time, but more important, it kept them connected, allowing them to share what was in their hearts. If we were hermetically separated, we presented no less of a united front to our enemies, Lucy later wrote. These notes allowed her to pretend that there was no wall between them. It's enough to close my eyes and cross from one side to the other and freely sail away. The few surviving scraps of their correspondence sent from Suzanne to Lucy, apparently in November 1944, provide only a glimpse behind the walls of the prison. Some letters mention day-to-day aspects of prison life, like cleaning the cells, passing cigarettes between prisoners, doing the laundry. In one, Suzanne tells of Lucy playing with a cat in the yard during exercise. Nearly all address Lucy as amour, many wishing her good night, suggesting that Suzanne was writing in the twilight or evening hours to avoid being seen by their guard. In one letter, she drew two intertwined hearts. In another, she included a sketched pair of smiling lips. As she had done for decades, Suzanne, in her messages, was still taking care of Lucy. She offered to send books if Lucy needed some and discussed one she had read a few months earlier in hopes of distracting Lucy from her boredom and her fear. She reminded Lucy of experiences they shared and people they had known, using memories to connect them to the times and places before their arrest. Sometimes she offered to share small comforts. Tell me if you want a candle, Suzanne wrote. I don't have any candlesticks, but made one by melting a little one with a small spoon, a testament to her resourcefulness. Good night, courage, love, she ended. And I think that's such a powerful message. That was how she ended one of her notes to Lucy, with that phrase, good night, courage, love. And so here they are again in a Nazi prison, continuing their love story, continuing their relationship, working to support one another through this very scary time, not knowing what was going to happen, and really thinking that each day would be their last, that they would wake up and be taken out and executed. I won't tell you how the story ends. You'll have to read the book and find out for yourself. But I think it makes me think about, just in terms of the future. I'll just sort of go back to what I was saying at the beginning, is thinking about the power of history, and how every story matters, and how queer history matters, and how the stories of people like Lucy and Suzanne and their love story and their relationship, which is left out of most history books, that story matters too. And that's part of what I, as a historian, and what many colleagues who study history these days in particular are trying to do, bring more of those stories into our awareness and into our understanding. And I think there's a lot of effort and a lot of really good work in queer history that's sort of trying to push those stories forward so that we can know the fuller experience of the human past. So I'll end there, and I'll put my information in the chat. And thanks very much for including me in this tonight.
Thank you, Jeffrey, and thank you for that glimpse of the queer past and the vision for the future. Good night, courage, love. I think if you can remind us, that'll be our sign off tonight once we get there. I'd like to hear next from Ben Klein, who I think is in the midst of a thunderstorm. So we'll get you while the connection's good. And let me put you on spotlight here. So Ben Klein grew up in West Appalachian foothills and now lives in Cincinnati, Ohio. Author of the chapbooks Sagittarius A Star, yay, and Dead Uncles. Ben was the 2021 recipient of Patricia, I'm not sure I'm going to get this name right, Godeke Prize in Poetry. His work is forthcoming and can be found in Thrush, Cutbank, The Holy Mail, the Indianapolis Review, Limp Wrist, Diagram, Hobart, Impossible Archetype, A&U Magazine, and many other publications. And you can read more at benkleinonline.wordpress.com. And we're going to drop that in the chat too. So welcome, Ben.
Thank you. Greetings to everyone who is here tonight and to my fellow panelists and readers. It's quite a pleasure. In the spirit of pride and queerness and Pride Month, I am going to read one poem starting Sagittarius A star, and then one from Dead Uncles, and then 3 newer pieces, one of which was actually inspired by an interview that Elliot and I did a month ago. And he asked me a question, and it literally the poem jumped out of my head 2 hours later, and I just finished it the other day. So from Sagittarius A star, which is a chapbook from the very queer-friendly Sibling Rivalry Press out of Arkansas, I am going to read a traditional ghazal, there's debate about how you pronounce it. It's an old Persian form that was taken over by the Italians in the 14th century, so on and so forth. Anyway, this poem is extra gay and I like to read it. It's called Huzzle the Stars. That night in the telescope, I discovered the far stars are not dead angels lit at feathered angles. The stars are uneven men, averse and akin like my mom, preoccupied with fueling exotic excuses only parents and stars have the longevity to sustain. The parsecs pass uncounted between 2 or more stars, and even more men to prevent mutually detrimental immolation. Pants afire, the men aspire to asking the stars for what they might remember, and I discovered no stars sit still, similar to men who cannot love others, only stars charting a path to impossible answers. They follow to me, just another Ben who dreams of men as angels reeling me into the stars. That's a very traditional huzzle. It has internal rhyme, external rhyme, in rhyme, and very specific meter. I love that poem. All right, then from Dead Uncles. So Sagittarius A star is meditation on aging and memory, and it's like sci-fi. There's poems written in C++ and old DOS computer code and weird stuff like that. Dead Uncles is very Appalachian. It has the subtitle of Poems, oh, you can't see it. Oh yeah, you can. Poems, Folklore, and Reverie. So it's the whole idea of Appalachia and how people interact and the large families sort of being this sort of feverish daydream that you exist in. And nobody tells the truth, but nobody lies at the same time. And typically when I read from this book, I read the first 3 poems, but in the spirit of this evening, I am going to read a poem that was published in A&U Arts and Understanding magazine last year. It's called Dead Uncle, 1979. Hail Marys lobbed at the altar from the last pew, only 25. Light sentence mumbled fast, no beads, no sweat. I knew Father heard the grin inside the sleeves of my white tee rolled like James Dean. Cool red vinyl of the kneeler seeping into my torn jeans, the sizzle of votives, naked Jesus, amen. He never looked me in the eye outside the dark booth. I squinted like Brando in the woods, full of tall, graceful tamaracks, grateful men. He insisted, you believe and behave as if eternity can be that easy with repetition. Blessed art thou among men who want to in ways they've been told they shouldn't. I practice languor, forming pearls, sweat, men who shouldn't always do like Montgomery Cliff, ruined by a turn too fast into the hour of violent sarcomas, dumpsters overflowing with shriveled uncles. Other men from the park, I wandered in lavender dusk, in swelter that feels like heaven and hell, whether you believe or not. So yeah, Dead Uncles is full of, all the poems are like strange fever dreams, and it's a fun ride, and there's a lot of weird references to Appalachian stuff that you'll be like, I have to Google that, and then you'll regret it. Okay, I'm gonna read 3 more poems that are all newer, well, newish. The first one was the Christopher Hewitt Award for Poetry last year from A&U magazine. Hold on, I gotta adjust my screen here really fast. Oh, and it doesn't want to do that. Okay. Don't cooperate, technology, because Lord forbid. All right, sorry. Okay. This is called It Was Never Supposed to Be Ours. Our uncles were silent and buried. The internet infant. Drag queens still use names like Fonda Peters, and bowls of free condoms glowed on the bar of the Driftwood when I promised to keep you safe, supplied with Twizzlers and good gin, warm, not sweaty when we spoon nude, your body like the long L of my last name under yours when we signed the lease. Cousins, we told the landlord. We had no idea. How could we, under all the eulogies, waterfalls buffering one line at a time, your reverend calling us fags, the Clintons resembling hope, maybe change when you unlock the door. It's musty, but it's ours, that old attic with 2 windows. We had no idea. Our uncles marched into graves our grandmothers left no lilies on. You made me banana pancakes, crispy bacon, and a decent proposal. The tungsten ring in my mimosa, a blue wish I wanted to shout when it touched my lips. I like that poem because it's sort of like, I mean, I was 19 in 93 when there was first like civil unions in Hawaii and the Clintons, and it's funny to reflect back on that time and then think about just now and just all the different people and the freedom, and it's just beautiful to go. I love going to Pride events, just stand and watch all the young people just be so damn fabulous, and I love it. I absolutely love it. So this is the poem that I was talking about earlier that was inspired by doing Elliot's podcast. He asked me a question. I want to see Elliot's face, so I have to like expand the chat screen. Oh, I just went away from the middle. What happened?
So now you can see Elliot's face.
Oh no, I expanded it. You're in the middle now. Elliot's gone all of a sudden. You can put me back in the middle.
All right,
yeah.
There we go.
Yeah, so he asked me a question, when did you know you were queer? And I thought it was really interesting that he asked me when instead of how. And so then I thought back to that time period, and this poem kind of like popped out of that. And it's called More Ears. Instead of how, the interviewer asks, when did you realize you're queer? Time, kudzuing reason, as if age 6 or 58 counts the same wrinkles in a loop whose circumference forms a ring of cocks or a jizz horizon of hurried supernovae, and how discovering I'm queer bulged against the red lycra of a Speedo on TV, another episode of Entertainment Tonight, the hoop earring Prince sported to Dick Clark's dismay, dangling like a wormhole I'd burrow through. Watching, I reply, an episode of Magnum P.I., after the interviewer says ratings fall if your answers are boring, but Tom Selleck's thighs will do. I tell them I don't mind if they edit my answers for drama adds time to bulge and bukkake more ears. I love it. I love that we can sort of like, I mean, just even thinking about that you can do an interview and talk about that stuff now. It's so great. All right. I got one more. I've been writing a series of poems inspired by a Cole Porter lyric. Our love affair was too hot not to cool down. And this is a sonnet that starts, the title is that lyric, and then it goes into the whole thing. And it's the whole sort of May, December nature of a lot of queer relationships and sort of gays my age and older sort of having to readjust to the idea of gay marriage and sort of the freedom with which young people exist that was so beyond even our wildest imagination. Our love affair was too hot not to cool down, glaciers forming in our second February, the vortex invading for a consecutive year, the pink roses too close to the window, brown by the 16th. You may recall it as a thaw, budding before spring, unexpected third shifts, names I didn't recognize, waking your phone as you slept on the other side of my bed every other Friday night. I admit my omelets weren't worth suffering. I hogged the remote. Couldn't finish the torte you brought. You wouldn't, citing new Speedos, Sunday parties at pools of friends I'd never met, which is to say I was making mental notes, which is to say thwarted by lust, luster, a younger man without lack or loss, your joy stirred with a freedom I never dreamed. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Ben. And if you would like to read more of Ben's work, which you should definitely order, Sagittarius, A Star, and Dead Uncles, you can check them out online. And there are his links in the chat. So we're going to hear next from Carter. And let me put Carter on, well, I'll do the bio and then do that. So Carter Taylor Seaton is the author of 3 novels: Father's Troubles, Amo Amas Amat, An Unconventional Love Story, and The Other Morgans, numerous magazine articles, and several essays and short stories. Her nonfiction works include Hippie Homesteaders, The Rebel in the Red Jeep, and We Were Legends in Our Own Minds. She holds a Tamarack Foundation Fellowship Award for Lifetime Achievement in the Arts, and the West Virginia Library Association honored her with the 2014 WVLA Literary Merit Award. In 2015, Marshall University's College of Liberal Arts honored her with an award of distinction. In 2016, she received the Governor's Award for Lifetime Achievement in the Arts. She also won an Ella Dickey Award for Literature in 2018. So welcome, Carter. We are so looking forward to hearing from you. You are on Spotlight and ready to go. But you're muted.
There you go. Thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you for inviting me to share the stage with all of you. The book I'm going to read from, you're seeing it backwards, I guess, is the second novel I wrote, and it's now 10 years old. And beyond that, it is set in 1985. So Ben's remembrances of how things used to be is a great segue into this book, because this is set in 83 through 85, and it's obviously before the AIDS crisis, before Rock Hudson died, before Ronald Reagan finally had said the word gay and that there was AIDS. So it's about a young woman whose biological clock is ticking, and she's been looking for Prince Charming. She's never found him until she falls in love with a man, marries him, and then discovers he's a closeted gay man. And this is, and then it's a scenario of what she believes to be betrayal and all of these things that just drive her completely crazy. She leaves Asheville, North Carolina, and moves to Atlanta, hoping to blot out the past. So she has met a woman who lives next door to her, who's become great friends, and her name is Cassie. And this is a passage between the two of them. Knowing what she should do and actually doing it were 2 different things, as Mary Kate discovered over the next week. The morning after the Cajun dance, Mary Kate called Bo and begged off their Sunday run. It was true that she was stiff from dancing, but she could think of nothing else but Cassie, and yet she didn't want to talk about it to anyone, certainly not Bo. Throughout the week, she told herself she wasn't avoiding Cassie, but she didn't seek her out either. She also told herself her work schedule prevented their after-work cocktails, but that wasn't quite true either. Although she did work late twice, on the other evening, she found errands to run at Lenox Square, stayed in town to run, or met Eleanor for dinner in Little Five Points. All the while, she stewed over Cassie's revelation and their friendship. It wasn't that she was uncomfortable around Cassie, at least she hadn't been until that night, but it was like seeing her grandma for the first time without her bra. Beforehand, she'd never thought about those pendulous breasts. Afterward, they were all she could see, even when Granny was fully dressed. On the other hand, she missed Cassie, missed their easy conversation, her sudden explosive laughter, the stories she shared, and the support she provided. Without her, a hole had developed in Mary Kate's life. So she was grateful when Cassie called saying, "We need to talk." Nervous but eager to patch things up, Mary Kate invited Cassie over on Saturday for coffee cake and vanilla nut coffee. It was a perfect morning for duck sitting. The temperature was predicted to hit 70, but right now, even though the sun was shining, it was so cool that Mary Kate shivered and buttoned her cardigan. She and Cassie sat in the Adirondack chairs facing the yard with the food and coffee pot on a low table between them. The fading blue hydrangeas she and Bo had rescued from the previous owner's neglect nodded in the sun. Finches, grosbeaks, and sparrows fluttered around the bird feeder, while a patient pair of mourning doves waddled below, pecking at the seeds scattered by the melee above. Mary Kate pointed to the pecan tree. "Look at it shake. It looks like..." Then they saw the squirrels. At least 6 were chasing each other through the branches. "I'll bet they're sizing it up for when the pecans ripen," Cassie said. "Wait another month and you'll be picking them off the ground." "I can't wait. I've got a great pie recipe that I'm dying to make with my very own pecans," Mary Kate said. As she picked the last crumbs off her plate and licked her forefinger, Cassie said, "Look, I know I pulled a shocker last week, but I didn't expect you to be so upset that it broke up our friendship. Yes, I'm a lesbian, but I'm also your friend. And I want it to stay that way. And I'm not hitting on you either, but can't we still be friends?" "I know," said Mary Kate. "I was awful, but I didn't mean to hurt your feelings. Let me tell you why I reacted the way I did. I hope you didn't take it as a slam. Darling, I didn't take it any way at all. I just thought you knew, that's all," Cassie said as she stirred her coffee. "The older I get, the thicker my skin becomes. I've learned over the years that people will either accept me as I am or not. It's just that simple." "Well, let me explain anyway. I need to tell you a story," Mary Kate said, setting her plate of half-eaten coffee cake on the table. "I've avoided telling you about my divorce, but now I think you need to know what happened. It might explain my reaction." She took a deep breath. "The reason we divorced is that I discovered my husband, my ex-husband, was gay. I caught him with another man." Cassie sipped her coffee but did not say a word. Mary Kate took another drink of hers and then launched into the whole story of how she met Nick, of their marriage, her miscarriage, and the scene with Dr. Carlucci. "So I thought if I left it all behind in Asheville, I'd be able to forget it ever happened," she concluded. "When you said what you did, it all came back to me. I guess I felt like I'd been tricked again. Stupid of me, I know, but..." Cassie put down her mug. "Honey, I'm mighty sorry for what happened to you. Nick shouldn't have cheated on you. I'll give you that, but I didn't lie to you. I never hid the fact that I'm gay. It just never came up. You know, I don't usually introduce myself by saying, 'Hi, I'm Cassie, I'm a lesbian.'" The tension broke and Mary Kate laughed. "No, I know you didn't lie. You've been so good to me, and I really like you a lot. I just was surprised, I guess. I've always thought that you could tell, you know?" Now Cassie's throaty laugh erupted. "You mean you thought you had that gaydar? That's what some folks call it. Doesn't always work that way, does it? You know, what Nick did, marrying you and then cheating on you, is not unusual. Lots of gay guys get married because that's what society expects. They either live in the closet, suppressing their real nature, or they have a secret gay life, cheating on their wives." She reached for another slice of coffee cake, took a bite, and then continued. "It's getting better, but it's still very risky to admit you are a homosexual, unless you live in San Francisco." Cassie laughed again. "All I've ever known about the gay lifestyle is from the articles I've read," said Mary Kate. "You know, the bathhouses, gay bars, lots of sexual partners." She looked into her cup, embarrassed to meet Cassie's gaze. "Oh, there's plenty of that too, but let me tell you what I told some gal Beth and I met who asked about the gay lifestyle. She asked what it was like, and I said, well, Beth teaches all week and I write. In the evenings, we take turns cooking or we go out. On the weekend, we go to the grocery, wash clothes, and clean the house. Then if we aren't too tired, we have friends over or go to a movie." She shrugged and laughed. She got my point. "So do I," Mary Kate said. She got up and reached for Cassie's empty mug. "Want another cup of coffee?" "Sure, why not?" Cassie said, smiling. So the reason I wrote this book about a homophobic woman is because I lived in Georgia, in Atlanta, for about 10 years. And many of my friends down there were gay. And when I came back to West Virginia, sadly, this was 25 years ago now, sadly, I went to a party and one of the first things somebody said was something derogatory about the LGBTQ people. And it made me so angry that I realized I was not a soapbox kind of person, but that my soapbox was my writing. And so I took pen in hand, as they say, and decided to write about somebody who has to change her attitudes because of the friendship of somebody who's gay. And I was happy to learn from reviews that I got on Amazon that people said I actually did change attitudes, which is what I wanted to do. And I think the best thing that I can say about Pride going forward is that this situation almost never exists now. It's such a relief to see a gay man running for president, for people to be married and happy and out and living their life just like they ought to, and being able to be proud of who they are. And I want to celebrate that.
Thank you, Carter. And I think that's a great segue into the discussion. We have made so much progress over the past 30 years, 50, 100, however you want to slice the historical arc of it. But let's maybe transition a little bit now to thinking about the future and thinking about what we want to see change. And I'll go first. That's the privilege of the platform, I guess. But one of the things I've been thinking about a lot is we have now a very visible and vibrant LGBTQ culture in America and in many parts of the West. And so one of the problems that we all encountered, say, as young LGBTQ people, was that we were looking for representation. We were looking for our community. We were seeking it out when it was invisible. That is no longer the case. So that's a huge improvement that's happened. I do still think that heteronormative culture is the dominant mainstream culture, and that it's going to recede in importance in uneven fits and starts, right? Like we, and the beauty of being queer is that we can push against that, and that's that's a really fun place to be. But that hopefully over time, I'll call it a straitjacket. The straitjacket of heteronormative culture can begin to be untangled and removed. So that's kind of where I'm thinking about it. But I'd love to hear from each of you. What do you want to see Pride become? What do you want to see in terms of advancement for the LGBTQ community?
Well, I'd like to still see it celebrated like it is now, but I would like very much for people not to have to be pointed out in media as being the first this, the first that, the first gay, the first Black, the first African American, the first Asian American. I think these titles, these labels help to divide this country. And if people would just accept people as people, regardless of their background or their sexual orientation or their sexual identity, self-identity, we'd be a whole lot better off. And I applaud Pride, and I want it to continue, but I don't want every single time that somebody, Pete Buttigieg, for instance, hits the newspaper, that they have to mention that he's gay. I think that's, in a way, and maybe now it's a celebratory thing, but I think in as we go forward, it becomes unnecessary, and I would like to see it finally end.
Ben, you unmuted. Do you have something to add?
Well, I was just going to say that, I'm sort of, as a young Gen Xer, I'm sort of an in-betweener. Like, I wasn't part of the generation that was wiped out by AIDS, but I'm also not the generation, the millennials that came after, who benefited from the work of that generation and have also had a completely different existence thanks to these things. And so I always, like, for me, Pride was always, it was a march, not a parade. But I appreciate the transition to it being a parade, that it's a celebration as much as it is a protest. And I really hope that as a community, we can figure out how, and I'll give you the example, the whole thing with the NYPD goal group being banned from New York Pride this year. Like, I hope that we can figure out a path that points of resistance within can figure out a way to run parallel so that we can be both a parade, which is a celebration, and a march, which is a protest. Because I think we still have work to do in both areas, to both fight for rights, but to also celebrate our existence and celebrate our existence for ourselves and not for the validation of others. So that's what I hope. I mean, I always have to take a step back because I grew up in the generation, I was that in-between group where we were dangerous. Like, I mean, I'm 6'3" and 200 pounds. So like, I would walk into spaces and I would realize that I made straight men nervous. Like, because I was very obviously gay and I was unapologetic about it. And I understood the edge to that. And part of me laments that going away, but I realize that not existing, that certain people can be comfortable around me. I'm like, wow, that's some damn progress right there. And that's actually super important for the culture at large. But yeah, as far as Pride goes, I hope we figure out how to meld the parade and the protests together. And so that we can welcome everybody, the people who still haven't achieved equity and equality, and the people who have some version of that, as you said before, in the heteronormative society have sort of achieved that. So that's what I hope. And I also hope that, you know, as I become older and get gay elder status, that I always remember to leave space and provide support for the young people who want to come along with new ideas and new paradigms for how things should be. I think that's super important. I actually posted that on Twitter today. I'm like, because I saw a very famous person say, I'm so over Pride. And I thought, well, you know what? If you're over Pride, good for you. So turn on your heel and support somebody who still needs it, who needs that energy and who needs that space to have that community support and uplift. And then I'll stop talking because I just realized I ranted for like 3 minutes.
I don't know. You're getting a lot of nodding heads. Everyone's agreeing with you fiercely. So I think
it's the gin talking, honey.
You've got some wisdom there that I appreciate.
Could I just pick up on some of the things that what Ben said is, and Carter said is absolutely true. I think we've got to stop the identity politics, you know, that you're a this or a that, or you're an Appalachian American, or you're a Caucasian American, you're a gay American, you're a Asian, whatever. I mean, we've got to get back to the point of everybody is just a person. But piggybacking on what Ben said, I would really like to see Pride become, I don't want to seem like I'm doing a public service announcement, but a mentorship kind of thing where, and I talked about the organization that we're getting ready to launch this fall at Ole Miss. This came from student feedback and interest, but also it's an opportunity for us, no matter where we fall on the spectrum, to be a mentor and a role model and a counsel for the younger generations behind us. And Ben was absolutely right. We all occupy different spaces. You're a millennial, a Gen X, or an old geezer, whatever you might be or consider yourself. But I really would like to see Pride become a not a mentorship program in terms of, like you see in high schools with careers, you mentor somebody who's an accountant that maybe you're interested in, but for those of us who are a little bit older and have benefited from some of the experiences of the people in the past, reach out to the younger people in our communities, in our regions, in our states, and serve as mentors and role models. Be someone that young people, when they're struggling, when they're concerned, when they have questions, can go to, or just be that person that they can come to and vent to about whatever's going on. Because I grew up in the 80s, I didn't have anybody to vent to or to lean on about that. And I really think we can make Pride be an extension of all the values and all the importance, and the heart of Pride being about giving voices to the voiceless all year long. And one of the ways that we do that is kind of looking back and reaching out to the younger LGBTQ youth in our communities, in our regions, our states, and say, hey, I'm someone that is here for you. I'm here if you ever need to talk. Let's go to lunch sometime. Let's be there for each other, because I think that's important. It's important in all areas, but I think it's really important with LGBTQ relationships that we are able to reach out and extend a hand and be someone that the younger generation can lean into and talk to and feel comfortable being around. And I think we model how the future can be, and they're watching us, whether we realize it or not. They're looking at us and they're watching us and they're listening to what we do, how we speak, how we interact and react. And so I think it's important for us to make those relationships.
Thank you. Yeah, you've raised some interesting points that I don't hear very often in my sort of LA, California centric discussions. And I think it points to the fact that we have often very different ways of looking at the same issue, and that we need more of these dialogues. And it doesn't happen on Twitter, and it doesn't happen on social media. We don't get the kind of nuanced discussion that I think we need. And I don't think we even have time today to really get into it. But I did want to make some space for Jeffrey, if you have anything more you want to add about where you want to see Pride go.
Well, just very quickly, because I know we're really out of time, but it's always I'm a historian, and historians are notoriously bad about thinking about the future. So I don't say too much, but I think it is interesting to hear in our conversation about, some of the ways in which these ideas about identity have served a purpose historically. And so there's this sort of tension between, how do we carry those identities forward? At what point do they sort of meld into the sort of more general, humanity? I think a lot of different people are sort of thinking about these questions about how do we retain something that is unique to a community versus, this sort of the broader question of universalism. I think a lot of different people are sort of grappling with that. I'm right in the middle right now of finally getting a chance to read Ibram Kendi's book, How to Be an Anti-Racist. And I think grappling with those same kinds of things in the African-American community, because part of what he says is that, if you say, well, I'm not a racist, that's the sort of same way of masking the problem, right? And so what happens, do other groups have the same kinds of issues of thinking about, where do you highlight identity versus where do you sort of downplay identity? And that's speaking historically, since I'm a historian, I think that's always been a kind of a back and forth. And I don't have any answers, for this, except I'm just kind of making an observation just based on kind of what I'm hearing and kind of what I've been thinking about myself, and kind of the broader, cultural discourse that we're going through right now. I think, in other words, the kinds of things that we're talking about are not unique. I think that there are a lot of different folks who are sort of struggling with some of the same kinds of issues, and we'll just have to see kind of what the answers that we all come to in the future.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and thank you for bringing that up. I think we also need to reckon with the idea of erasure, and how do we empower people to speak up and be heard and join that common humanity without erasing their experience or their identity. Go ahead, Ben. Sorry.
Well, I was just going to say, I also think it's important because it's not ever going to be taught in schools, at least not until you get to probably not even the undergraduate level, it's at the graduate level, that the work that people like Jeff and Carter And I was at a reading of the San Francisco-based Perfectly Queer group that meets once a month, and they had a bunch of queer historic novelists read from their work. And I was like, oh my God, there's such a depth to the fiction, creative nonfiction that's going on about queer history. I mean, Jeff's, what he read, I'm like, who gets exposed to that? So it's so important that we support that as a community, both as a broader community and a literary community, like to support that work and give it platform it and give it space, because that's where a lot of people are going to learn this stuff, because they are not going to be taught this stuff in formal education settings. And yeah, I was reading, oh my God, I'm totally forgetting his name, but The Prettiest Star that came out earlier this year.
Carter Sick.
Yes. I wept like 10 times through that book. I was just like, because I lived through that, and I was just like, oh my God, because I grew up in that part of Ohio, and I'm just like, yeah, we need that work. I've literally bought like 6 copies of that book and sent it to people. It's so crazy. So yeah, that's all I was gonna say after what Jeff said about his work. I'm like, oh, we need to like megaphone and platform that stuff as much as we can. So.
Yeah, I'm popping something in the chat that you might be interested in. It just came through like a few weeks ago. It's a 3-part series in the LA Review of Books. It's from Michael Nava, who is a sort of, I think he's a Lifetime Achievement Award from Lambda Literary, but it goes into the sort of different phases of queer literature in history, and it's a great starting point for a reading list or for a rereading list. And so yeah, invite everyone to check that out too. Yeah, I miss these discussions. I hope we have some more of them. I know we're out of time. One thing I just want to say is that I've done a little random number drawing, and so 5 of our attendees are going to receive an email from me with prizes, some of which are books from our authors today. So just keep an eye on your mailbox for those. And thank you so much for being here, Elliot, Ben, Carter, Jeffrey. This has been a fantastic way to capstone Pride, and I'm gonna head into July just as prideful. I don't know about you.
Thank you.
Here. Thanks, Cody, for emceeing the event, and thanks, guys. A pleasure to be with you. I can't think of a better group of people to spend an evening with talking about this.
I'm gonna say
Good
good
Thank
night,
you so much.
Courage, love.
Yes.
Good night, love,
Resist.
courage. Thank you. Good night.
Thanks, guys.